Good afternoon, nerd friends, and welcome back to the Nerd Bench unboxing time. I got a new Max 5 G2 and a new 56118 G2. We're going to pop them open and take a look. Now, these were inspection samples, so there's no shrink wrap on them. Normally, these obviously come with shrink wrap, but that saves us one step. Look at that gigantic speed control. Good God. I like to slide these all the way out. And this is exactly how they come. No plugs installed. You can set them up for single battery pack or dual battery pack. It comes with the series wire, and that is gigantic 8-gauge wire. You get some mounting tape, some shrink tubing, some zip ties, a little piece of sticky for your switch, your best friend in the whole wide world, the instruction manual, some super sweet HOBBYWING decals, and there is the speed control. Look at that thing. It's huge. That is a giant speed control. Max 5 HVG2 only to be trumped by the Max 4, which is a little bit bigger than this guy's. Aluminum lower case with the heatsink fins in there. It's got the screws so you can mount that to your mounting plate. As a pro tip from me, I like to make my electronics wiggle in my car so that when I flat land or crash or whatever, the shock isn't getting transferred directly to my hot electronics. So if you are going to hard mount these, mount them to something that moves around a little bit. Give yourself some shock absorption. But we'll get into the specs and all that fun stuff with these guys here in just a minute. But let's get onto the motor here. This is a 56118. This particular one is an 1100 kV. These are available in 650 kV, 800 kV, and this one is 1100 kV. The 1100 kV is only rated for up to 8S, even though the speed control is rated for 12S. These are sold in combos for folks that want to do high power 6S setups as well and want way more speed control than they need. A lot of us that do like the high power builds, it's nice to have a little headroom on the speed control. If you got the room in the chassis for a bigger speed control, a lot of times you're going to do that. But the 1100, like I said, only rated for 8S. If you run it on more S than that, it's going to get very hot. This thing is massive. Oh, look at that. So the numbers on the motor, 56 is the diameter in millimeters, 118 is the length in millimeters. And it's an oddball size of a motor for this setup, and it's more for the custom high-powered builds that don't have a lot of restraints on their motor sizes or willing to move some stuff around. These don't bolt into a lot of the RTRs that are out there, but they do make a ton of power nonetheless. 8mm output shaft on there with the flat for your set screw. And these are completely waterproof and censored. You know, any motor is going to be waterproof, with the bearings being kind of the exception. If you get a lot of water and muck on your end, you're liable to suck some of that into the motor through the bearing. So a pro tip that I like to do is when I put my pinion gear on, if I'm going to run this in a lot of muck and water, I actually do a dab of grease right around the bottom, all the way around, and it helps keep anything from getting in there, and the grease just kind of sits there and collects the dirt. You can wipe it off and clean that later. But here is the 56118, like I said, 1100 kV in this one. The other motors look exactly the same. They just say different kVs on them, but externally they look about the same. But your best friend in the whole wide world, the instruction manual, down there as well, so you can find out all the hard details and fun stuff like that. The all-important warning labels, because this is a censored system, which is new to the Max series with this G2 update, you do have to do the motor sequence correctly for it to work in censored operation. The sensor wire is our cool, unique HOBBYWING waterproof sensor plug. They're directional, so don't just go cramming them. There's an arrow on one side, and there's actually a super sweet HOBBYWING logo molded right into the plug, which I didn't know. But this is just telling you to make sure you put the motor wires in correctly. The plugs for the motors are massive. We get asked all the time how big the plugs are on these things, so we'll fire up the old calibers here. These are 8mm plugs that are on these bad boys. So the tube on the speed control here, you see there? 8mm. Those things are beef. They're upsized from what they were in the previous generations. So if you go to run the older style motor with these, the plugs aren't going to plug right in. You're going to have to change those out. When you do go to plug these in, they're not easy. They're not supposed to be. They need to be tight. And if you end up unplugging your motor often, these guys are kind of spring-loaded. You can run a X-Acto knife between there to open these gaps all back up to make sure they stay nice and tight. But you want to make sure that you get these guys seated all the way in there. Otherwise, they're going to get loose and cause you some overheating at your plugs. And that is a very bad time. Like I said, this comes with two main leads that you do have to solder your own plugs onto. QS8s, XT90s at a minimum if you're going to go with plugs from the company called AMAS. They make a lot of the high-powered plugs that are out there. I'm not a fan of the plugs that have the tube that you have to solder this wire inside of a tube. It's real hard to make good contact. Very important on these setups that when you do your power plug connections, that the plug surface touches the wire. You don't have your wire floating in solder. Solder will act kind of like a resistor in that situation, and it makes for a very poor connection. You'll get shutdowns, all sorts of stuff like that. If you're going to put these into vehicles that use like standard plugs, I'll say, Traxxas plugs, Dean's plugs, EC plugs, stuff like that, you may not have the greatest of time with power delivery, so just turn the punch all the way down on the speed control. That'll help with all of that. The Max 5 HV G2 is rated for 6 to 12S input, and that does include HV charge batteries. We get asked that all the time. It has a switching mode BEC that's rated at 8 amps. It does 6 volts, 7.4 volts, or 8.4 volts. And basically, this guy has the biggest wires you can get, 8-gauge power wires ready to go. And if you're going to go shopping for batteries, when you go into the big power setups like this, you want high C-rated battery packs for the most part, because these are intended to be mashed on, driven real hard, smash gas more than you're taking it easy on it, so to speak. So 100C stuff is going to be kind of the norm, at least 75C and above. If you're going to run the lower C, that's fine. Just be wary that when you mash on the throttle a lot, give it a lot of rapid throttle inputs, you may run into some battery sag issues and make shutdowns and stuff like that happen. Programmers, a lot of folks want to know what tuners these work with, and the great thing about the Max series is they work with all of the tuners. The very cost-effective LED program card, the middle-of-the-road LCD program box, the multifunction LCD program box, G2 edition that has the blue writing and it has a USB-C plug, not the older micro USB, or the OTA module, not the old Wi-Fi module. This is the Bluetooth version. It's called the OTA Programmer, and it works with our HW-Link V2 to let you do speed control tuning. If there are firmware updates, stuff like that, it can be done through there as well. Any of these will do the tuning on the speed control. There is no odd mode programming, so you can't do any button and light tuning because there's just too many settings these days to make that happen. Next up, we're going to get this guy fired up, and we're going to go through what all the settings do and when you may or may not want to use them. Would also like to note, on the programmer front, if you have a tunalizer, this has an OTA built into it. Another awesome feature of the tunalizer, not only does it do motor testing, you can use it to tune or set up your speed control settings as well. Now, before you get into tuning your speed control with a programmer of some sort, you want to make sure that you calibrate the speed control to your radio first. Any speed control, when you put it on a new build or move it to another radio, you're going to have to calibrate the speed control so that it can learn the neutral, the throttle, and the full brakes. And what I want to do now is just run through that real quickly. So I'm going to hook this up to my throttle channel on my receiver correctly. There is orientation on these receivers, so make sure that you get your black wire where it needs to be, because if you plug in your speed control to your receiver backwards, sometimes you can smoke that throttle channel, and nobody wants that. To get this process started, I'm going to do this with my FlySky Noble Pro, mainly because it lets me move. What did I just do there? It lets me move this radio out of the way, and I can show you guys the trigger super easy. So on the speed control, there's a light on the top that you'll be able to see, and there's some stuff on the button. So with the speed control connected to the receiver correctly, we'll push this off to the side. I do have a 8-cell battery pack hooked up over here. You hold down the set button, you turn on the power, you keep holding the set button until it starts to blink. Like that. You let go, and you tap it to set neutral, full throttle and hold, tap it again, sets full throttle, full reverse and hold, tap it again, and you get the 3 blinks, and that is basic calibration of just about any HOBBYWING speed control for the most part. Once you're done, you see you get the operational lights there. So when the speed control's at neutral, you get no light. When you give it gas, you get a light, and as you go through there, the light stays on. Now, never free rev your motor. These batteries are about half charged, but what I'm going to do is show you what happens at full throttle. So you go through the throttle, and then the green light comes on. So the red light stays on to indicate that you're giving it throttle, and the green light comes on when you get to full throttle. So just to give you an idea. And when I do reverse, the same thing will happen, but because the reverse defaults to turn down, you don't get the solid reverse or solid green light when you go to reverse, because you're not actually giving it full reverse signal from the speed control, even though you are from the radio. It's just smart enough to tell us all that. So that is basic calibration. Okay, so next up we're going to go through the speed control settings, what they do, when you might want to use them, how they affect the vehicle. To do this today, we're going to use the OTA because it looks nice on the phone screen. It gives it an opportunity to show everybody all the cool features. This is an orientation mark. It tells you which way these go. Your plug has the orientation mark on that upper edge right there, but for the most part, this guy, it's the little brass tabs go to the outside, and you're good to go. Plug that guy in. And if you have any problems connecting your programmer, if maybe you haven't calibrated it yet or you don't have your radio with you, just unplug it from the receiver. Some receivers will output a failsafe signal that tells the speed control like it wants to run the motor, so to speak, and the speed control defaults to lockout programming. So if there's any problems where your programmer won't connect or it gives you some hard times, just unplug your speed control from the receiver and that'll take care of that. So you turn the speed control on, the light comes on, open your app, tap on the little link icon, select your OTA from the list there. Mine's called Charlie's OTA. It connects. I already have my password in there. If you don't know your password or you haven't saved it, the default password, it says it on there. It's all 8s. It's very easy. And then to get in the speed control settings, we're going to go to parameters, but I'm going to set this up so we can see a little bit better. Okay. I adjusted the lighting and the things so we could maybe see this a little bit better. So to get into the speed control settings, you go to parameters. We'll tap on that. It takes a second to load. And then once we get in there, you can see the different settings that we have available. We'll start up at the top here. Reset gets you, if you make a bunch of settings, you don't like it, you can do the factory reset there. Import allows you to bring in profiles that you've saved on your phone already. Export allows you to send out the files that are your profile that you make to save onto your phone to use later. And then save is what you have to tap anytime you make changes. It doesn't automatically update the speed control. You do have to hit save to make sure that that sticks to the speed control. And then you can rename your profiles as well. So right from the top, we'll start with the basic settings. Running mode is where you can set the operation of the motor if you want to turn off reverse so that you have forward and brake only. Some racetracks don't let you have reverse, so that's an issue there. And then you have also the rock crawl mode. If you want to try rock crawl style driving with the instant reverse, that's an option. For the next one, you got lipo cells, and auto calculation is if you're going to run different types of packs, but if you're going to run one battery all the time, you kind of want to set that to the voltage that you're going to run. Low voltage cutoff allows you to set the level of the voltage cut that the speed control does when it gets to the low voltage of the battery. So we don't have numbers on here because the numbers will mislead you. Sometimes when you go to check your battery, it doesn't match what the cutoff says and you think something's wrong. So we have high, intermediate, and low. And it basically, low is more runtime out of the battery pack, high is less runtime out of the battery pack, or safer, so to speak. So at low, you're going to be right around probably 3.3 per cell. Intermediate is going to be closer to 3.5 per cell. And then high is going to be probably around 3.7 per cell, or maybe a little higher. And then if you run like non-lipos, lead acids, nickel metal hydrides, there's a disable, so you can turn the lipo cutoff safety off completely. Some racers actually leave their lipo cutoff disabled because they'd rather ruin a battery than lose a race. But motor rotation allows you to change the forward direction of the speed control so that all the throttle operations are correctly. Sometimes people will put a new system into a vehicle, they'll give it gas, the motor goes backwards, and instead of fixing it in the speed control, they reverse the throttle on the radio. It's kind of bad because then you're using the reverse as the forward and it can just lead to some problems. So motor rotation, especially with censored brushless systems, allows you to do that correctly. On a sensorless setup, you can sort of just switch the two of the motor wires to make the motor go the direction that you need. But with a sensorless, you definitely cannot do that. Some people have even mentioned like repinning the sensor wire. That's not really a thing. BEC voltage. This guy has adjustable BEC. You got 3 different settings there. 6 volt for standard, 7.4 for what I call normal HV, and then 8.4 for the newer generation super HV servos that are out there. Then we move on to our advanced settings. This is when you get real fancy and want to do some tuning. Max brake force controls the power of the brakes, so if you have the brakes are too strong, which they often are, you can turn it down in the speed control. That way you can let your radio be at 100% and get the most range of motion or usability as far as your brake travel goes. Makes the brakes feel a little bit finer. You can turn that up if you need to, turn it down more, and that way you can use your radio as a secondary adjustment for brake feel. Something that a lot of people do when they run a vehicle on a track. If you're doing a lot of speed run stuff or high speed stuff and you're not using your brakes a ton, or you don't have like emergency panic stops to do, lower brakes will help keep your speed control alive a lot longer, helps protect batteries from voltage spikes and things like that. When a speed control puts the brakes on, it's applying a short across the coils, and that short has to go somewhere. It goes through the speed control, back into the batteries, and it's just a huge spike that isn't healthy for anything. So turning your brakes down helps keep that alive. Max reverse force. Myself and many others are very bad at pushing our throttle the opposite direction, giving it reverse. So max reverse force allows you to turn down the reverse power so that when you go to use it, it doesn't like take off backwards super fast, and you're not backing into things super fast either. So it turns down the reverse speed. A start mode or punch. This guy is real important to, if you want your throttle to be very linear, you turn it all the way up. If you're having problems with like stuttering, or if you click the throttle and it doesn't take off, that means your system can't provide the power that's being asked when you do that, so you can turn this punch down. They're real helpful for tuning that sort of thing. Drag racers use it for launch control, so start with it low, work your way up. If you're real confident in plugs, solder joints, battery packs, all that fun stuff, I tend to run mine all the way up because I like a real linear throttle. I've mentioned that many, many times before. Drag brake is neutral brake, so when you let off the throttle and you go to neutral and the motor's normally coasting, this applies some brakes there. Helpful in high traction situations where you're doing a lot of push braking into a corner. This lets the car woe down a little sooner. Real popular in like two-wheel drive racing applications or some of the 10-scale stuff. Big vehicles, high power stuff, most of the time drag brake 0. Initial throttle force controls the start RPM of the motor. So if you give it throttle and the motor takes off too slow for you, you can turn up the initial throttle force to increase that force, or that feel, if you will. I keep using the words of the name to describe them, I'm sorry. But it controls the power that it starts the motor with. So think of it like a minimum RPM. Normally if you give it like 1% of throttle, you get 1% of motor response. This allows it to give 1% of throttle like 10 or 15% of motor response. So it starts the motor harder, takes off harder, gets rid of any initial throttle dead spot, if you will. And then we get into the fun stuff, the one that people always ask me about, turbo. Electronic timing advance from the speed control is available in a lot of the speed controls in the series. The Max series does turbo, and turbo is electronic timing advance after full throttle. So if you roll into the throttle and you get to full, it applies a electronic advancement of the firing of the motor, so it actually overdrives the motor to make it go faster. It adds RPM at the cost of current draw and temperature. So the more timing you run, the more amps you're going to draw, the hotter it's going to get, that sort of thing. So you have from 0 all the way up to 24 degrees of turbo timing, and it will add exactly that. It's like adding N-bell timing on a mechanical motor, much like in the real world of cars when they add timing advance. It's the same type of thing. You're overdriving the motor's firing sequence to make it go quicker. The second one we have is turbo delay, and this is so that you can have a little bit of tuning to that. If you get up to full throttle and you're at full throttle for 0.2 seconds, then it starts to feed in the turbo timing. So you can adjust this for more or less delay, or you can have it come on as soon as you get to full throttle. And the reason being is sometimes you need the motor to build all the way up. You get to full speed, it needs to build, and then hit it with the timing. And that's why this is adjustable. So you can have a little bit of control about how you're putting your turbo to the motor, allow it to get all the way up to speed, helps with amp draw, stuff like that. Now we get down to the data that the speed control saves. The speed control has a basic data recorder in it that will do minimum voltages, maximum currents, maximum temperatures, and RPM as well. So it gives you a real simple guide to look at how the speed control's been running. If you had an issue, you can take a look at your temperatures and stuff like that to see that right here. And that also shows up in the LCD box as well. There's a screen for that also. And like I said, once you make all your setting changes, don't forget you have to put save, otherwise all your hard work will be for naught. All right, another cool feature that a lot of folks don't know about, not only does it have data recording or a data log, this has some real-time data tuning as well. And what that does, it allows you to look at the speed control's onboard information while you run the motor. I'm turning the radio on right now so that everything arms up. Speed control wakes up, and now you can see the data on the screen. It shows you the voltage that it's seeing, the current that it's currently passing, the RPM the motor is doing, throttle position, and the current temperatures. And I'll bring the radio over here, and you can see as I give it throttle, you can see all the information light up there. You get your RPM, you get your throttle percentage, your current, the voltage of the battery. So what this does is it allows you to do some benchtop testing of things so that you can check the P's and Q's, if you will, of a setup. You can't really drive around with the real-time data on because the Bluetooth link doesn't have that much range, but just to show you some of the cool stuff this has. Now, another cool feature that these have is if you run your vehicle with your OTA installed, which is something I'm not a fan of because you're getting this, it's like having another $50 bill in your car that you don't need to be there. But if you want to get some enhanced data logging, you can. when you run the speed control with the OTA installed, the OTA acts as a enhanced data logger, and it gets you more information that you see here on the screen. So you go onto history, you go from the OTA, and it brings up the files that are in the OTA. It puts them in number order. So this is the most recent one for my benchtop testing here. You go to view, and then it's going to bring up this very cool graph, which you can see all of the values over the duration of the run. So you get into this very cool chart, or the graph, if you will, of the data logs. It gives you the color coding for what each of the values are, and you can scroll through and kind of pinpoint the different areas, and it'll show you the values. So let's say this was my run, and I wanted to see what happened at the end of the run. I could zoom in over here, touch around, and see what all the different values are for what's going on. So pretty cool enhanced feature that a lot of folks don't know about. It's like a hidden gem of these systems. All right, so once you get done with that, you back out, and then got all your settings done. You're going to disconnect, and you're ready to get back into action. A quick note on the programmers. If you have any LED program card, these will also work. The difference is going to be your sticker on the front here that says what the settings are is not going to match what the settings are inside the speed control. These guys are very simple displays with different stickers on them. They don't have any brains inside that tell the speed control settings. So you'll reference your speed control's instruction manual chart. There's a setting chart in there that'll tell you what all the numbers mean. So you can use these just as well for speed control tuning and all that. All right, so we covered the programmer setup, all that. Let's talk about the size of this beast. As we mentioned, it is a big boy. So we're gonna go put the calipers on there because everybody loves that. 59 millimeters wide, and all the way to the top of the heatsink, we're looking at about 51 millimeters, and then our length is a massive 94 and some change. We'll do it in standard as well. Almost 3 3/4 inches, 3.7 on the length. The height to the top is a touch over 2 inches, and then our width is going to be 2.3, about 2 1/4, 2.3 inches wide. So it is a big speed control, to say the very least. Now, let's talk a little bit about the hard specs. It is a 250 amp rated speed control. I like to use the amp ratings to compare within a given brand's lineup. There's no certifications out there, and it's based off the MOSFETs that are used. So a lot of brands do that differently. So compare this to other HOBBYWING speed controls as far as the amp rating goes. This does do censored and censorless, obviously. It is rated for 6 to 12S. I think I said 8S in the beginning. So 6 to 12S is the official rating. The BEC goes 6.4, 7.4, 8.4, and it is an 8 amp switching BEC. So nice and powerful. And it does have a standalone programming port on the top of the speed control for the tuning. So you don't use the receiver wire. None of our speed controls do that anymore. I did unplug the fan during our tuning because the fan runs whenever the speed control is on this guy. If you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to shoot us an email. You can reach us anytime via our North America offices, northamerica@hobbywing.com. We'll be happy to point you in the right directions. If you have any topics that you want for the show, by all means, send us an email. Say, Charlie, talk about this. Tell us more about this. Tell us less about this. northamerica@hobbywing.com. We also have a podcast that we do the first and third Friday each and every month. You can find it on your favorite podcast service. Just look up RC Stuff powered by HOBBYWING. We give away a free HOBBYWING combo each and every episode. To find out how to enter to win, all you have to do is listen to an episode. And as always, folks, thanks for tuning in. Another episode of The Charlie Show right here on the HOBBYWING official YouTube channel. We will see you all next time.